I'm a female and I was 14 at the time. I'm from a big city in Germany, and that afternoon I wanted to buy a birthday present for a friend. I planned on taking the subway downtown where all the shops were. Even though my home city is big, it is considered very safe, so I've never felt unsafe going to friends' houses or downtown by myself. While I was waiting on the platform, a guy slowly walked past me and stopped just a few meters away from me. I remember that he must have been in his late teens or early 20s, and that he had glasses on. When I looked around the platform board, since the subway wouldn't arrive for another 3 minutes, I noticed that the guy was directly looking at me. Being a rather shy girl back then, I quickly looked away. After a few seconds, I wanted to check to see if he was still looking, and I took a quick glance. And surely enough, the guy was still staring. This went on until the subway arrived. By then, I was feeling really uncomfortable. Luckily, there had been a few other people on the platform, so I felt kind of safe. I got on and succeeded to snatch one of the few empty seats left since it was close to Christmas and the subway was packed with people. I couldn't see the guy from my seat and I slowly calmed down. A couple of minutes later, I got off at my stop and took the escalator up to the street. While standing on the escalator, I turned around and my heart sank. The creepy guy from the platform was standing a few meters behind me on the same escalator, and he was still staring directly at me. I tried to calm myself down by thinking that this situation was a popular meeting spot and a lot of people who wanted to go shopping got off here. And since it was close to Christmas, he was probably just some random shopper. When I arrived on the street, I turned right, walked down the street, and turned right again at the next corner. When I turned the corner, I quickly looked down the street I was coming from, and the guy was walking in my direction. I felt really uncomfortable, so I entered a bookshop and waited behind a bookshelf for the guy to walk to wherever he was heading to. After a few minutes, I got out of the shop, and that was the moment I started to panic. The guy was standing just a few meters away from the store, waiting. I should have ran back into the store and called my parents to come pick me up. Instead, stupid 14-year-old me hoped that there was a logical explanation for this guy's behavior and that he might have just been waiting for someone else. So I got out of the store and walked in the opposite direction of where the guy was. I walked faster, hoping that if he was following me that I would lose him among all the other shoppers. And when I turned right at the next corner, I was walking around the block. I looked back down the street again. He was still just a few meters behind me. While I walked even faster, I felt like I was about to cry, but I knew I had to keep calm. So I turned right again, and when I looked back and I still could see him behind me, I was positive that he was indeed following me. What other reason would he have to walk around a block without entering any of the stores? While I tried to think of a way to escape, I suddenly saw my chance. The streetlight on the crossing just a few meters in front of me turned red, and I started running as fast as I could. I managed to make it just barely to the other side before the lane was packed with traffic. I looked back. The guy didn't make it across the street and was standing on the other side, waiting for the light to turn green again, and he was still staring at me, but this time with a creepy, wide grin. At that moment, I had felt so scared as I had never felt before in my life, and I started running again, this time into a big department store just a few meters away from me. I knew that that department store had another entrance at the back, facing another street. On that street, there usually was a line of cabs waiting to pick shoppers up. I sprinted through the store and out of the other entrance. To my greatest relief, there was the usual line of cabs. I practically jumped into the first cab, and in tears, I told the cab driver my home address and then shouted, "Quick, quick, quick," while frantically looking back to the door, expecting the guy to come out any second. Fortunately, I didn't see him. I'm still thankful that that cab driver instantly started driving and only asked what happened and if I was all right when we were a few blocks away. In tears and completely shaken, I told him about the guy that was following me and how scared I was, and when we arrived at my parents' house, he refused to charge me and waited until I was safely inside. To this day, I am still grateful to that cab driver. I don't know if that guy who was following me was just playing a very cruel prank on me and just wanted to scare me, or if he had something way more sinister in mind. I live in a fairly large city where girls get harassed all the time, so I am kind of used to guys driving slowly next to you in their cars, walking up to you and asking you for your number. I was at my parents' house and I had to be home early in the morning. My mom advised me to stay home and to just travel in the morning. She doesn't like me traveling so late, but I felt invincible and sturdy living in the big city. For the record, I am not sturdy nor invincible. I'm 5'3" and fairly petite, so not being on my guard, I took the late subway home, alone. There was a guy sitting across from me saying a few things. I wasn't sure if he was talking to himself or me, but I didn't look at him. He left the subway compartment. All the time, I didn't notice the guy sitting behind me, a normal-looking white male in his 40s. The fact that he was sitting right behind me was weird and kind of creepy because almost the whole compartment was empty. Something was off about him and I didn't feel comfortable. Being on my guard now, I constantly hear him moving, shifting, and hearing his coat grit. Finally gathered all my courage and looked at him in the window. His hand was real sneaky between the window and the chair, about to grab my arm. I turned around real fast. "What?" I asked him boldly. He was startled and asked what was up. I walked out of the compartment and didn't look back. I still don't know if he was doing something weird or out of line, or actually did try to grab or caress me. But at the time it didn't feel right and I'm glad I took action. I don't think I'll take the late subway anytime soon. This happened when I was 18 and had just moved to Tokyo for college and was living at a dorm that was unfortunately about an hour away from my school and the center of Tokyo. Now, Japan is one of the safest cities in the world. People leave their bikes unlocked for hours on the street in the middle of the city, and nobody will lay a hand on them. The only real crime problem they have is pervs on the subway with wandering hands. But since I'm very obviously American and won't put up with crap, I guess no guy has ever been brave enough to try anything on me. That was until one night when I ended up going out to dinner with a friend and had to take a late train back to my dorm. If you've ever been on the Japanese subway, you'll know how crowded the express trains can get at night and early in the morning. They literally have men standing outside of the train who push passengers in like a bunch of sardines. Well, I was pretty tired and not in the mood to stand for an hour between a bunch of sweaty drunk businessmen, so I opted to take the local train back to my dorm, even though it would take about 15 minutes longer than express. So I'm sitting on the train and nothing is out of the ordinary. As the train goes along, more and more people start getting off the train until it's only me and one other man in our car. He's just your typical middle-aged Japanese businessman, a little on the greasy side. After a few stops, no one else gets on and the man doesn't get off, but I can feel him watching me from the other side of the car. I'm not too worried. I get a lot of stares being a young American girl in the middle of Tokyo, but then the guy starts inching his way across the car closer to where I'm sitting. I think, no big deal. Maybe he's trying to get close to a map on the wall. I can still feel his eyes on me, and just to be safe, I move to the other end of the car. It's more comfortable in the reserved seats anyway. Then it gets weird. The guy gets up and moves to the exact same seat I had just been sitting in. I was kind of grossed out. What was he trying to do? Feel my warmth from having just been sitting there? Now I was kind of getting uneasy. Luckily, the train stops at its next stop and the guy gets off the train. I was relieved, until he comes back on the train through the door right in front of me and sits directly next to me, looking straight at me and open-mouthed breathing on me. I didn't make eye contact and just kind of sat frozen for a second until I realized what was going on. I looked at him like, "Oh, don't even try anything on me," and stood to get up. Luckily, someone else got on the train at the exact same time, and he literally bolted off the train before the door shut, and we left. I don't know what he was planning on doing that he'd risk missing his stopover, but thank God someone else got on the train when they did. Needless to say, I put up with the standing for an hour and take the express train from now on. I used to go to college in downtown Chicago. I would ride the L train from the Loop to Lakeview twice a day for school. The train I took was the Brown Line, at the time known as one of the safest, less sketchy lines. But the creepiest thing that happened to me in my time in Chicago just so happened to occur on that very train line. So I was sitting on the train where the seat faces outwards, where you are near the doors and facing directly towards the seat across from you. I was facing this younger looking guy. He started making small talk with me and I assumed he was a student. We were talking about classes and such until I noticed something in his eyes changed. I still can't put my finger on exactly what changed, but it put me on high alert. A few seconds later, he pulled his backpack off of his lap, and I noticed he was touching and pleasing himself while speaking to me and staring directly into my eyes. That was the middle of the day, around 3 p.m. I freaked out and shot up and went to the other side of the train. Luckily, we were just getting to a stop, and I immediately hopped off and waited for the next train. I was on a subway platform that I could transfer to a new line when all of a sudden someone comes up next to me. I was reading, so I didn't look up until they got pretty close, and I suddenly hear someone speaking. "I really like your shoes." I look up and see a man standing next to me. He's probably about 5'5" and was probably pushing 220 pounds or so. He was a wide guy, to say the least. He was smiling at me, and it was pretty unnerving, especially since his teeth were incredibly crooked, but I rolled with it as best as I could, trying to be polite. Thank you." He leaned closer. "Where did you get them from?" Now, I have black Converse. They're incredibly common. Just the fact that he approached me on my choice of shoes made me skeptical, but now that he had asked where I bought them, I was immediately on alert. I could tell this guy was up to something. Anyway, I told him where I got them, and he proceeded to talk to me about the book I was reading and about how it was one of his favorites. I was going to say something like, "Oh yeah, tell me, what's it about?" But like I said, I wanted to be polite, but in order to make him get the hint that I didn't want him there, I stuck with one-word answers, thinking that he would maybe get bored with me and back off. "You're a really nice girl. See, I'm gay, but I love girls." Now I was on full alert. I could tell in no time that he was just saying that to get close to me. He was assuming, oh, girls love gay guys, so I'll just say that I'm gay. So I just nodded and smiled. "I could be your best gay friend. Oh my god, it would be so cool. Do you like gum? I have some gum. We could blow bubbles together and sit next to each other on the train. Do you have a phone number? I could hit you up sometime and we could have lunch." He was inching closer and closer to me while he spoke, getting right up in my face, smiling that smile, and I was trying to nonchalantly scoot away. I was getting more creeped out by the second, so I just said, "I don't give out phone numbers." He started to say that he understood, saying, "You can't be too careful, girl. There are a lot of weirdos out there on the streets," and suddenly leaned forward and hugged me. This was going too far. Of course, since he was invading my personal space, but I was so taken aback that I stood there for a second, frozen in place, and before I could respond and tell him to get off me, he started to hump my leg. Yes, he was humping my leg. I immediately pushed him away and backed up, saying I didn't want him hugging me and to not come near me. "Oh, girl, it's okay. I just really like you. I mean, I'm gay, but I love girls." I was so thankful that the train came at that moment and I started walking for the door. He was calling after me that there wasn't enough room in that train car for us to sit next to each other, but I just kept on walking. I finally just heard him call, "Okay, I'll see you around, honey." Well, I boarded the train and I could see a huge slimy grin on his face out of the corner of my eye. I made sure to always check over my shoulder to see if he was following me for the rest of the day, and even cut my trip downtown short so I could get home and shower, because I felt absolutely disgusting. My boyfriend and I had already gotten on the subway heading home. It was late at night, but there were still people around who were coming and going to bars. There weren't a lot of seats in the car we chose, and we ended up sitting sideways near the middle. And that's when I noticed him. He was across from us and a little more forward in the car. However, his head was turned and locked on me. My boyfriend had sat on the opposite side of where he was and was occupied with his organizer, so he hadn't noticed. But then the guy said out loud in a slurred voice, "You're beautiful." I smiled nervously because I didn't know what to do. The guy looked like he was far gone on some kind of drugs. His eyes were kind of glassy as they looked at me, and he said it again. "You're beautiful." My boyfriend put down his organizer and was looking at the guy, then at me to see my discomfort. It seemed like the other passengers were looking at the situation as well, either at the guy or at me. I was looking back at my boyfriend, now hoping this would cause the guy to take the hint, and he was too far gone. One more time the guy said, "You're beautiful." And it was enough. My boyfriend stood up. To his credit, he didn't want to get into a fight, so he just said to me, "Hey, I think those seats are open over there." And he pointed to a pair of seats near the front doors. We stood, and my boyfriend stayed between me and the guy, keeping his eye kind of on him but not staring at him. Just after we passed him on the way to the front of the car, we heard him say, "I've got a plan." This in and of itself was creepy. I had to think this was some kind of thought loud enough that he couldn't suppress it. I was freaked out completely. My boyfriend also wasn't comfortable, and so instead of going to the seats he pointed at, we went to the door. Luckily there was a stop in less than a minute and we got off, checking that the guy wasn't following. We got off into the crowd and my boyfriend said we'll take a cab the rest of the way. We checked behind us a few times as we walked to the exits but didn't see the guy. The station had one of those plazas where you can exit at any of the corners on the streets, and we decided to go to the far corner because it will be easier to get a cab going in the direction of our home. We go up and wait for a minute or two to hail down a cab. I get in first and my boyfriend after me, and the cab starts to roll off. I'm looking out the window, and I see at the catty corner subway exit, the guy is standing there looking around, no one else near him. I look down, and there's a small knife in his hand, and I yell, "Oh my God," and it causes my boyfriend to look as well. Right then, the guy sees me as I'm passing in the cab, and he puts his hand in his pocket and turns to go back down the subway stairs. I have no idea what his plan was, but I'm thankful I never found out. So I was leaving for work in the morning, but as I was nearing my subway stop, a homeless man stopped me in my path and began to motion for me to take off my headphones. I take them off.
"Got any change?"
No, I don't. Sorry."
"Well, can I at least have a hug?"
No?
"Come on, I haven't had one all day."
Then he goes up in for a hug. God, I hope he doesn't have Ebola, I thought to myself. And then he proceeds to grab my butt, and then starts sensually kissing my neck. I'm a 6'2" overweight bearded man, by the way, so I had no idea how to even begin to process this. I froze up. I wondered if he was gay or if he was just playing at it because he is a crazy homeless person. I didn't feel like I was in danger. I felt more bemused than anything else. After a few seconds, I think he wasn't getting the reaction he wanted, so he let me go.
Okay, you take care now,"
I say before stumbling towards my train. Anyways, it was super bizarre. It actually took me almost an entire day to really process what had just happened to me. So I live in New York and was going into the city to meet my parents after work one day. I think I was about 18 at the time, and I'm female. I was on the subway just getting into Penn Station, and it was extremely crowded, right at rush hour. I sat in one of the seats by the end of the car, and the car filled in slowly around me. A man stood directly in front of me and held onto the bar above my head. Immediately I felt very uncomfortable having his crotch literally in my face, but I reassured myself, thinking that it was very crowded and he probably didn't mean to do that. I decided to look at him as little as possible, so instead I would look down at the floor in his shoes or to my right out a window across from me. I kept counting the stops, feeling very nervous even though I told myself there was no reason to. So as I was studiously trying not to look at the man in front of me, I turned to my left. A man there was looking at me with a very odd expression. It for some reason made me wonder what was going on with the man in front of me, so I turned to look, to see out of the corner of my eye that the man had his junk fully out and erect in my face. I panicked. I had no idea what to do. I leaned away from him as much as possible and refused to look at him. I noticed that he kept leaning in with the motions of the car leaning further into me, but I refused to look. I had no idea what to do in this situation. There was nowhere to go. The car was packed. Finally, my stop came and I ran off as quickly as possible. I found my mom soon afterward and cried. I was so shocked. We found a police officer and told him about the incident, but he wasn't concerned. Now I make sure to sit on the edges of the subway cars, and next time I will stand up and make a scene rather than sit there. I know this isn't much for most of the people's posts here, but it was really disturbing for me. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia. Our subway system is called the SkyTrain, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a train on a track above street level. That being said, this happened to me last summer. I was coming from downtown Vancouver and headed back to Burnaby via the SkyTrain. A man gets on and sits next to me. Not a big deal. However, the train was nearly empty and there were plenty of other open seats for him to take with no one in them. Brushed it off and continued listening to my music. A stop or two later, I noticed he was slightly nudging my left breast with his elbow. I'm rather busty, so I brushed it off as him not even realizing that he was doing that. However, shortly after that, he had his hand resting very close to my thigh, and over the course of 15 minutes had developed into him full-on squeezing my thigh and rubbing dangerously close to my privates. I just turned my head out the window and silently cried while he did this. I'm socially awkward and don't know how to stick up for myself in these situations. I suddenly summoned up the courage to yell at him, so I took my headphones out of my ears and was about to scream when he suddenly says, "I don't feel good," which completely deflated my courage to stand up for myself. My stop was coming very soon, so I just told myself to endure 3 more minutes of this and I'll be free. He then tried to strike up conversation with me. I pretended not to speak English and spoke in Dutch instead. I thought it would deter him. My stop came and I quickly got off the train and ran down the stairs. It wasn't until I heard the man's voice screaming, "Wait, wait," that I realized that he was following me. I continued to run and ran to the outside of the station to catch my breath and hide. I thought I lost him, so I ran back inside to use a payphone. My cell phone was dead, to call a friend to come pick me up. I then circled the area while waiting to make sure he hadn't followed me. I thought I was safe to rest and wait for my friend to come get me when the man walked up to me again and said, Are you lost?" I replied, "No, I am not. I saw you circling the station and I wanted to make sure you weren't lost." I continued to pretend and not speak English, and he kept asking me where I was from, what my name was, etc. And I hoped my broken answers would make him leave me alone. I was wrong again, of course, and he continued to persist with questions about my personal life, which made me uncomfortable. My friend finally arrived and I quickly got in his car and told him to drive. He asked me if I knew that guy, and I told him what happened. He wanted to turn the car around and beat the crap out of him, but I told him I just wanted to forget about it. In hindsight, I should have phoned the police or stuck up for myself, but I wasn't thinking straight because of how terrified I was. At the time of this encounter, I was 16 and participating in an exchange program. My high school in America was partnered with a high school in Germany. I have been learning German since kindergarten, and every year about 10 or so kids from the German program at my high school get to go and live in Germany with a host family for a summer. My exchange partner Vanessa and I get along great, and as it turned out, my best friend Rebecca was on the exchange with me, and her exchange partner Anne-Catherine. They were best friends with Vanessa. Needless to say, the 4 of us were practically inseparable. One day we decided to head into Nuremberg to do some shopping. Vanessa and Anna-Catherine lived on the same street, so the 4 of us walked to the little subway train station thing by their house. They lived about 10 minutes outside the city, so the subway train ride wasn't long at all. As we were taking the escalator down to catch the subway, we heard someone whistling at us. Thinking it would be some boy messing around, we look around to see who it was. We hear the whistling sound again and lock eyes with a man riding up the escalator, and we were on the down one, so we locked eyes right as we passed each other. The man was probably in his late 50s or early 60s, and he was huge. I would have guessed around 6'7" in height and easily close to 300 pounds. Stupidly, the four of us waved at him, and we were just messing around and didn't think he would think anything of it. Much to our chagrin, he took it as an invitation to begin terrorizing us. Suddenly, he starts sprinting up the escalator, and once he gets to the top, gets to the down escalator and starts shoving people out of the way to get to us. For a big guy, this dude was moving fast. It was apparent that he wanted to get to us, though the people surrounding us probably thought he had left something on the train and wanted to get it before it was too late. At this point, we were basically at the bottom, so we take off running, and by the grace of God, the train we needed had already pulled up. We run onto the train and sit down, relieved that we had got away from this incredibly scary man. Or so we thought. The train we were on was separated into sections, so there were see-through doors you had to go through if you wanted to get to a different section, if that makes sense. About a minute into our subway ride, we see the guy moving through the section in front of ours. We immediately stand up and sprint to the next section, hoping that we'll be able to find a more crowded one that we can hide in. This continues on for a few minutes until we realize that we've reached the front of the station. We sit down in the 4 seats closest to the front, and sure enough, the man comes barging into our section. He sits in the single seat across from us and positions himself so he has a clear view of us. Then he starts laughing really deep and slow. We were trying so hard not to look at him, but out of the corner of my eye, I could see that his eyes were unblinking and bulging out of his head. He was grinning in such a malicious way, and he had started to drool. He even licked his lips a few times. We started whispering in English to each other, hoping that this guy's English isn't that strong, and we decide that at our stop we're going to sprint off the train and find a policeman or someone who can help us. The train gets to our stop, and we bolt off the train. Luckily, our stop is pretty crowded, so we're hoping to duck out of sight and then find someone who will help us. We turn around to make sure he isn't behind us, and the guy hasn't gotten off the train, but he's shifted so he has a clear view of us from the window by his seat. We watch for a little, and the train begins to pull away, but not before the man widens his smile and begins slowly waving at us. I swear he didn't break eye contact or stop waving until the train was entirely out of sight. I don't really know what that guy wanted with us, or why he was so hell-bent on chasing us through the train. Maybe he was planning on getting off at our stop with us, but when he saw how crowded it was, decided just to stay on the train because he knew he wouldn't get away with whatever he was plotting. All I know is that I was absolutely scared out of my mind. Hey guys, thanks for listening. If you enjoy these stories, please consider supporting my channel on Patreon, where for $1 or more a month you'll have early access to all future narrations ad-free. Also, feel free to check out the merch sites at Spreadshirt.com, where I've added some new cool retro designs that would go great on a mug or an iPhone case, I don't know. So, thanks so much guys, and I'll see you again soon. So about 6 months ago, I was feeling a hankering for sandwiches, so I decided to drive to the nearest city to eat at Subway. No.